My name is Emily Carter, and this is something I've never told anyone in full. Not my family, not my closest friends. It happened in the summer of 2017 when I was 27, living in Millhaven, a tiny town in rural Pennsylvania. I'd just finished grad school, studying library science, and moved there for a job at the town's only public library, a sagging brick building from the 1890s that smelled of old paper and mildew. Millhaven was quiet, with barely 2,000 people, a single stoplight, and fields stretching out to the horizon. I thought it'd be a fresh start after a rough year, my mom's cancer diagnosis, a bad breakup, and student loans piling up. I needed somewhere cheap and calm. That's how I ended up in the apartment on Maple Street. The place was a converted Victorian house built in 1883 with high ceilings, warped wooden floors, and a steep, narrow staircase that groaned underfoot. The rent was $350 a month, a steal for a one-bedroom, even if it came with peeling wallpaper and windows that rattled in the wind. The house had 3 units, mine on the 2nd floor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Grayson downstairs, and a truck driver named Tom who was rarely home. The landlord, Mr. Heller, was a gruff guy who lived across town and only showed up if something broke. The house felt heavy, like it was watching me. At night, the silence was so deep it pressed against my ears. I told myself it was just the contrast to city life, but deep down, I knew something was off. It started in late June, about 3 weeks after I moved in. I was coming home from a late shift at the library around 9:30 p.m., climbing the staircase to my apartment. The bulb at the top was dim, casting long shadows on the faded floral wallpaper. Halfway up, I glanced at the landing and froze. There was a shadow on the wall, a tall, thin silhouette, human but wrong, its edges too sharp, like it was cut from black paper. It wasn't mine, the angle didn't match, and it stood too still, as if someone was lurking just out of sight. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky in the empty stairwell. No answer. My heart thudded as I climbed the rest of the way, but the landing was empty. The shadow was gone. I brushed it off as a trick of the light. The house was old, the wiring shoddy, and the bulb flickered constantly. But the next night, it happened again. Same spot, same shadow, tall, unnaturally thin, with no clear source. This time, I felt a chill, like a draft from nowhere. I checked the landing, even peered down the hall to Mrs. Grayson's door, but no one was there. When I asked her the next day, she gave me a strange look. "This house has its ways," she said, her voice low. "Don't linger on those stairs." Her words stuck with me, though I didn't know why. I started avoiding the staircase after dark, taking the steps 2 at a time if I had to. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At night, I'd hear creaks from the stairs, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing. I'd check the peephole, but the hall was always empty. I asked Tom if he'd noticed anything odd, but he just shrugged. "Old houses make noise," he said, sipping a beer. "You're too jumpy, kid." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the dread. By early July, things escalated. I started having dreams, vivid, suffocating dreams of climbing the staircase, each step heavier, like wading through mud. The shadow was always there, waiting at the top, its shape blurring at the edges, but its presence solid, pulling me closer. I'd wake up gasping, my room colder than it should have been, even with the summer heat. One night, I woke to a sound, a low, rhythmic thump, like footsteps climbing the stairs. They grew closer, stopping just outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock, but there was only silence. When I checked, the hall was empty, but the air felt thick, like breathing through fog. I needed answers. The library had a small archive of local history, so I spent my lunch breaks digging through old newspapers and property records. The house was built by Elias Ward, a wealthy merchant, for his wife and daughter, Abigail. In 1897, Abigail died at 19 in a tragic accident on the staircase. The records were vague, no police reports, just a brief obituary and a note that Elias sold the house soon after. I found a photo of the family in an 1895 newspaper, and Abigail's face haunted me, pale, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I asked Mrs. Grayson about the history. She'd lived in the house for 30 years and knew the rumors. They say Abigail fell, she told me over tea, her hands trembling slightly. But some think her father pushed her. Elias was strict, kept her locked in her room for days. After she died, people heard things, steps on the stairs, whispers. They say she's still here, angry. I laughed it off, but her story gnawed at me. That night, I taped a piece of string across the staircase to see if anyone was walking up there. By morning, the string was snapped, but there were no footprints, no signs of anyone. I started a journal, documenting every incident. The shadow appeared almost nightly now, sometimes shifting slightly, like it was turning to face me. The creaking grew louder, and one night I heard a whisper, a soft, feminine voice saying, "Stay." I bought a cheap security camera and set it up in the hall, aimed at the staircase. The first night, the footage showed static at 2:17 a.m., right when I'd heard footsteps. The next night, I checked the camera live and saw the shadow flickering on the wall, its edges writhing like smoke. My phone died seconds later, though it was fully charged. I was terrified now. I called Mr. Heller, begging him to check the wiring or plumbing, anything to explain the noises. He came by, poked around the basement, and found nothing. "You're letting this place get in your head," he said, chuckling. "Ghosts don't pay rent." His dismissal made me angry, but I was starting to doubt myself. Was I imagining it? Stress from work, maybe, or lack of sleep? I confided in Sarah, a coworker who loved paranormal podcasts. She suggested a cleansing ritual, sage, salt, and a prayer she found online. I felt ridiculous, but I was desperate. We smudged the apartment, sprinkled salt on the stairs, and recited the prayer. That night, the creaking stopped, and I thought it worked. But at 3 a.m., I woke to a loud crash. The salt was scattered across the stairs like something had swept through it violently. The camera showed nothing but static again. I started researching Abigail more deeply. In the library archives, I found a letter from 1898 written by a neighbor who claimed Elias was unhinged after Abigail's death, muttering about her watching him from the stairs. Another record mentioned a tenant in the 1920s who fled after hearing a girl's voice at night. The more I read, the more I felt Abigail wasn't just a ghost. She was angry, trapped, maybe even vengeful. I decided to confront her. One night, I sat on the staircase with a flashlight and a kitchen knife, my hands shaking. "Abigail," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what do you want?" The air turned icy and the bulb flickered. Then I heard it, a clear, soft voice behind me. "Stay with me." I spun around, but no one was there. The shadow loomed on the wall, taller, sharper, its edges curling like fingers. I ran to my apartment and locked the door, my heart pounding. The next week was a nightmare. The footsteps came every night, louder, closer. Objects in my apartment moved, keys on the counter one minute, on the floor the next. Once, I found my journal open to a blank page with a single word scratched in shaky handwriting, "Stay." I hadn't written it. The dreams were relentless now. Abigail at the top of the stairs, her neck bent at an unnatural angle, her black eyes fixed on me. I'd wake with bruises on my arms, faint but real, shaped like fingerprints. I moved out in August. I couldn't stay. The library let me work remotely, and I found a new place across town, a modern studio with no history. But the dreams didn't stop. Even now, in 2025, I sometimes hear footsteps in the night, feel that cold grip on my arm. I looked up the house last month. It's empty, listed for rent again, called charming and historic. I wonder who'll move in next, and if Abigail will find them too. Or maybe she only wanted me.